Hello, everyone. Welcome to Get Out of Rap. It's episode 80, and today I'm joined by Brucine Francis. Brucine is a recruitment director with the customer contact industry. You must have seen her posts and her presence on LinkedIn, and is also diversity and inclusion team lead, and owner and founder of BA Francis Consulting. Brucine, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really looking forward to it.
It's overdue. I think I've always sort of spotted you in our industry, predominantly around recruitment. I've always thought you'd be great to come on the podcast. I'm really glad we're able to do it. As is always the way, let me just start by asking you, how did you get to where you are today? What's your kind of backstory?
So interestingly, I never studied to become a recruiter. I don't think anybody ever does. I actually studied because I wanted to get into marketing for travel and tourism, worked really hard at it, then realized there was actually no money in it at all. Was working part-time for Vodafone. And so interestingly enough, I then thought, well, I like earning money. Let me just continue on the Vodafone path until I decide what it is that I want to do. Went off on maternity leave, had my daughter, and realized there's no way I can go back into retail. And Vodafone's head office was too far for me to commute to. So an agency rang me up and said, "Oh, have you ever worked in a call center?" I was like, "What's a call center? I've never even heard of it. Like, what is it?" So I did a bit of research quickly, then phoned her back saying, "Oh, funny enough, yes, actually." So it was a bit of a white lie. So when I worked for Vodafone, and somebody who's actually still in our industry, actually, he used to be kind of like the head of technical support. And I used to ring him to ask him technical queries. So he'd answer my questions. So as far as I'm concerned, yes, I've got experience of working in a call center. So fell into it, and I worked for the first ever recruitment business that was set up to recruit for call centers, which was a company called CCP, which is call center people. Getting confused with the other business that's named similarly now. So the first ever business that was there, and I was really intrigued. I was like, gosh, what is this about? So had never been in recruitment. So my first role was a telephone interviewer. So I literally worked for large blue chip companies. And my role was to interview candidates who responded to adverts in the newspaper, which that shows my age because that was such a long time ago. And literally all I would do is interview people, and it was all right. It brought in the money. It was never kind of my passion. But then the opportunity arose for the business to grow, and they decided, well, why don't we utilize the candidates that we have and actually step into contingent recruitment? So that's how I became a recruiter. And I'd never been a recruiter either because, again, my background was retail. So had to kind of learn on the go. But then Steve Usher, who I'm sure you're familiar with, he joined the business and he was my mentor in the business. And without Steve, I would never have been a successful recruiter because the business wasn't set up to coach and train people. It was like you win or you lose. It was kind of that approach, but in a positive way. So learned about call centers, learned about recruitment, and my career just kind of flourished from there. But what I found was that, and I can even tell you, there are people who I met back in 1997, I am actually still in contact with now, and I probably placed them as an agent, team leader, right through the ranks. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I'm, some of my best friends are actually from the call center industry. Without this world, I would say, I wouldn't have some of the friendship circles that I have. And I'm truly grateful for them as well, because I've learned so much from them. So I continued with my career at CCA. So, kind of did what I was meant to do. But then I realized that it's probably not what I want to always do. And then I may have put it out to the universe. The company went bust into liquidation. I had no salary, no nothing. And then Steve had already set up CCA. So at that point, and then I just moved over naturally to join Steve over there. And then what I found was that I wanted to be a recruiter. I liked people. I always had that flair around talking to people. So rather than being this person who was banging the phones trying to bring on new business through a cold database, I just utilized the network that I had. And I just would ring those individuals, catch up as I always had done anyway, and bring in business that way. So it was always about relationships and honing in on those relationships, because candidates, and I always think that people who don't believe this are wrong, but candidates, whether they are an agent, a team leader, or a senior leader, at some point are a potential to be a client. So I've always treated them that way, because, you know, if you're good to the people that you work with, then they'll reciprocate that back. And I've always been a believer of that. So majority of my work has always come in from that way. So was with CCA for 15 years in total. And then probably around 2010, I was like, I need to do something slightly different. So started international recruitment, which was kind of like the rebirth of my recruitment life, effectively. Absolutely loved it. Like literally learned so much. And then I had a passion for South Africa. So it just was then all of a sudden, this is my focus. Let me focus on SA. And that's kind of where I built a huge niche around the BPO sector, and then my network out there, and then my network in the UK who wanted to relocate out to there as well. So that's kind of how my journey began around the international piece. And then Steve and Ian, who brought me into CCA, they left the business and things changed. And I decided that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to work in a business that was actually really focused on people, as in me, and what I was looking for, what I was about. But I just wanted to kind of break free of the restraints of being managed, I guess, and do my own thing and spend some quality time with my family, because I'm sure you know that when you're at work, but I actually worked, and recruitment is not 9 to 5. And so my child, like literally, you know, it sometimes really hurts me to have to repeat it. But when she was 15, she literally used to say to me, my family was the after school club, because she would always be in after school. So that really hurt me. So when that happened, I thought, that's it. I need to do something different. So I left CCA after 15 years and thought I was going to do something completely different and a bit lifestyle-y, which was food and drink, because I love to eat, love to drink, and it was all about kind of working in that sector. That didn't pan out, unfortunately. The guy who I was going to work with, he just didn't have the money to pay me. So all I could do was go back and do what I knew and loved, which was recruitment. So that's where BA Francis Consulting kind of sprung about.
It's a lot to unpack there. I love it though. I love the kind of, there's a common thread running all the way through that, and that is, you know, trying to find that you're adaptable. You initially, right, you, like a lot of us, you fall into things and find that you're good at it, but underneath that, underpinning it all, is this appreciation of people, whether they are the candidates that you're placing or the customers initially in retail and in the call center that you're interacting with. But I just love that ethos, and it's borne out well for you, right? That a candidate who might start off as an agent, if you treat them well and you look after them, doesn't matter regardless of the title, because guess what? Those people have then gone on to, you stayed through their career. I love that, because it's my journey, you know, agent, team leader, contact center manager, head of, director, you know, and then that, for you to be there alongside people helping them do that must be a great feeling.
Yeah, because it feels like I've been on such a journey with some of them as well. So I've seen when they, you know, they've got married, they've had their children, you know, whatever scenario they've been through, I've been on all of those journeys. So I am a recruiter, but I'm also, and I don't know if the word friend is right to use in every single situation, but they can always phone me and say, B, this is happening in my life. You know, so if I'm not ignoring you, or what advice would you give? So I've always been that kind of like safety belt for everyone. They'll just ring me about everything, and I don't mind that. I like that, because people buy people, and as far as I'm concerned, the industry we're in is a people-centric industry, and it shouldn't be just about what that person can do for you at that one particular time. It should be a natural thing that we're always doing things for people all the time. I've always been a believer of that.
I love that. The other thing as well that really kind of hit me and resonated was about your daughter, because I think now, I had children young, my older children, I think would probably, they're both like 19, early 20s, and then I've got two stepdaughters and a daughter under the age of, all three of them under the age of 15, and I like to think I'm a bit more present for them now than I might have been for the older two, because work's changed, but it must have been so hard to hear that. And I do have a question, I'm not just rambling. Do you think the pandemic and the fact that we've all had to work from home will change us for the better? So maybe other people come in to become parents won't have to go and do what we did.
Absolutely. So I started working from home in 2016. So the pandemic and working from home was my normal anyway.
Right.
So that for me, from a parenting perspective, my daughter was obviously older at that point, but it just meant, like you say, I was present. So I was always at home, dinner was always cooked, and we could always then take time out to have those conversations, because I think we go to work for our families.
Yeah.
But what's the point in going to work for your family if the only time you spend with them is when you go on holiday? So,
Yeah.
and that has been a real big positive shift for me. But the pandemic, like you mentioned that a little while ago, I didn't even realize, even though I'm working from home and I'm, kind of still living this great family lifestyle, I didn't even realize that I'm still not really present. I'm not actually there. So the pandemic, like most people, was a bit of a panic for me, as in, oh my gosh, where's my revenue going to come in from? And, all those panic things. And then after a week, I was like, there's nothing I can do to control this. So let me kind of like look at where I am, my life. And I literally just switched off from work, literally switched off, worked on myself. And then I started to then invest in myself, but also my child, but also because I'm a grandmother now as well. So invest in my grandchild, but actually took the time to focus on, I can't do anything about what's going on externally. So let me improve what's going on around me. So we would go off and explore and do things I didn't even know were even in my area. I mean, I've lived in my house for lived in the house for 24 years, and I didn't realize I had a pond not far from me, and just random things that you just never, which I'm so grateful for. But I just felt disappointed that I hadn't experienced those places before. So the pandemic for me was a real eye opener.
It's mad, isn't it? I mean, how many people live in capital cities and haven't done any of the tourist things, let alone stuff on your own front door? But yeah, it's great to be able to go and explore. You mentioned something as well about kind of putting things out into the universe. Is that been important to you in your career? This kind of like affirmations, and are you
Absolutely.
a believer in that kind of thing?
So I didn't even realize. So I, like most people in sales, so I had a time where I was like absolutely blooming. It was going amazingly well. Then it started to kind of be mediocre. And then I went on, it was an event in Canary Wharf, and it was just like a 3-day, it was like an American type, where you're running around going, really excited, but I loved it. And I came back to the office like, and everyone's looking at me to say, B, kind of like what's taken over you? But it really shifted the way I operated. And I kind of then, the normal, you don't do it very often, so it disappeared. But then the last 2 to 3 years, I've been really focused on the law of attraction, manifestation, gratitude, appreciation, all of those things. And everything, I think, is we put it out to the universe and it comes. So I'm not sitting here saying that I'm a preacher or anything like that, but what I am is I appreciate and I'm grateful for everything that happens in my life, whether it's good or bad. There's a reason and a lesson behind it. So when the pandemic hit, of course, as I said, panic. But then I put it out there saying, look, I need guidance as to what I need to do. So for me, it was taking that time out, relaxing with the family. I had a house sale that had just gone through before we went into official lockdown. So I was trying to manage that and move house and everything else. But everything happened at the right time for me. So I was truly grateful for the time out. And I know that there was a lot of serious things that took place during that time, and people unfortunately lost their lives, but I was grateful for what I was able to do in that time and support people and reach out to people I hadn't spoken to for ages. But yeah, the law of attraction for me is huge, and it's something that I do every single day.
I'm a relative latecomer to that kind of the concept of positive affirmations and gratitude being a part of your daily routine. But now I'm kind of like quite evangelical about it, because I just think even if you don't see it manifest itself in actual things, it just gives you a better frame of mind.
Absolutely.
And I think because we're predisposed generally to be not maybe even not even negative, but on the more negative side and neutral. And then the moment you start thinking, they're not always the best of thoughts. I think that kind of getting into the habit. So I have this thing written on my whiteboard where when I come into this room to work, that's one of the first things I do is just repeat that a few times in my head. And it's made me feel better. I keep it as simple as that. So it's interesting to hear that this quite early on, it sounds, in your career has been a factor.
Absolutely. But I think the last 2, 3 years I focused on it way more than, I think it's probably because I've had more time to as well. But I appreciate everything. And I didn't realize, like, we take everything for granted so much.
Yeah,
And that's the
yeah,
thing is, we're not grateful for it at all. So
no,
I'm now grateful for everything.
that's great. That is great. I want to ask you about something like a. You always seem to be quite adaptable in that story about your career. It's kind of okay, this happened, then I did this, and then I tried that, and I love that because it's just about trying things and not having those kind of regrets. But I wanted to ask you about what you've noticed or why the niche of South Africa, and how important is it for people maybe looking to go out on their own to have a niche?
So I think my niche, it happened accidentally in terms of being South Africa, because that was just kind of where my main focus was. But I still recruit in Europe, and I'm doing so much more so at the moment rather than South Africa, Philippines. I've recruited in Thailand, the US. So it was just that was a focus for a long time, and I still will recruit there because I built a huge network there, but I still do those other locations. But I think what the reason why it was important for me to focus on South Africa at that particular point was because it was growing. It was a huge market. We didn't know enough about it, and there were people who were working out there and we probably knew nothing about them. We kind of fell over them, if that made sense.
Yeah.
So it was important for me to understand, well, why are they a better base for call centers to go and set up, and what was the appeal to the clients doing so? So I understood that, and South Africans are absolutely phenomenal. They're such brilliant people and they work so hard. So I understand that. But they also, some of the clients I work with, even though they've got a huge labor force, they give so much back to those individuals as well. So it's not just about it being cost effective. The actual advisors or the manager, the leaders are getting something back from working for the organizations, because it's tough living in places like South Africa. So we take for granted living here. And if we can't work or whatever the situation, we're all typically covered. But in SA, it's not like that. So people are so grateful to go to work until payday, and then they're literally off shopping.
Yeah.
But, and that's what I really liked. And as I said, it was because I knew, and still do know, a lot of people in England. So if a client said, this is the brief, this is the job, I probably wouldn't even need to advertise. It would be literally, I know the 5 people I'm going to send because I've been speaking to them over the last 3 months. So this just gave me the opportunity to stretch myself, and I just enjoyed it. So I still like recruiting in the UK. Well, I love it, in fact, but it just gave me an opportunity to grow.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think having worked abroad myself in call and contact centers, it's only beneficial to your like education and your growth, like learning and developing your mind, because you see different things, you see different ways of working, and it's nice to come back and kind of break down lazy perceptions. I think there are some lazy perceptions of global call centers for sure, and you must see that yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, the perception is perception until reality kicks in, right? So,
Yeah.
I think so my perception of what a call center was back in 1997, which I have to say quite quietly, it literally was what I'd seen on TV. So obviously then I started to go around call centers. So until you're in it and you understand it, reality, like you say, is perception. So I just think everyone should see what it's like, because it's so different. And most people anywhere else in the world are so humble in terms of wanting to work in the industry.
Yeah.
See it as an opportunity rather than, well, I haven't got the option to kind of do anything else, so let me just do a call center role. They I've seen people in interviews or in sessions where they're just so grateful just to even have the experience, to even have the opportunity to interview for a role.
Is it still possible for people to relocate internationally?
So it's tough. So that hit me the most, obviously during COVID. So all my international recruitment pretty much went on hold. In South Africa, there was some trouble quite recently. So that also kind of put a bit of a spanner on things. But South Africa, so there is still opportunities over there. However, the government obviously wants the local talent to be focused on being hired rather than international. So yes, there's still opportunities for relocation. So I'm recruiting in Spain and Poland and Germany at the moment, and they all are open to people coming in internationally. So maybe not so much SA, but in Europe are definitely open to it.
Because you're still doing UK recruitment as well, do you find different geographical locations have different things that they desire in candidates, or are there more generalizations and different similarities rather than differences?
Similarities, I would definitely say. So do
Really?
you mean UK as in like Scotland versus London as an example?
Well, just well, it's just you're saying Spain, Poland, and I know you still do UK recruitment. Are the candidates that are required in any kind of role in those locations, do they differ in kind of we need someone like this or we need someone like that, or
typically the same? The only thing which is an exception is typically language. So if you're, so a client of ours is looking for someone who speaks German and Lithuanian, I'm like, wow, challenge trying to find those languages. But
yeah,
challenge is typically languages. But believe it or not, they're out there. So, it just takes a
yeah.
little while to find them. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is finding the language expectations. But typically skill set wise, it's the same as the UK.
What about for prospective, well, candidates out there right now in our industry, with your kind of expert eye, are there things that frustrate you when you see either people on LinkedIn or when candidates send in applications, you think, oh, you're letting yourself down, or I wish you'd have done X?
I think one of the things that frustrates me, and because I don't advertise as much as I used to, because I already know some of the CVs I'm going to get in my inbox, and I know there's no point in me even opening the CV because they don't even match the brief. And I think that is a bit of a frustration, not just for me, but for every recruiter. It's because I think I sometimes pick up the phone and say, look, you're applying for all of these roles, your skill set isn't even relevant. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're giving yourself a little bit of a negative perception from us as recruiters, because if you're applying for a job that's say 35k, then you're applying for a job that's 50k, and then they're 80 and 100, there's no real reality around it. So I'm giving that as an example. There are obviously more intricate examples I can give, but that's an example. So it's frustrating though, because we get bashed a lot because obviously we're not as customer centric as we'd like to be, even though we all try our best to reach out to every person who reaches out to us. But it is really difficult. And also the amount of CVs that come in at times, there's a huge amount. And what I find is that if a job spec says A, B, and C, most people probably won't even have A and B and C, but they're still sending the CV in. And it's really difficult because then I find that people then calling and emailing saying, I want feedback on my CV, or I sent my CV 35 seconds ago. Can we have a catch up about it? And when you're really manic and your client is challenging and saying, as an example, that we need CVs by this date and it's this specific, sometimes it's really difficult to kind of reach back out to people. So I always kind of put an evening aside and send emails saying thank you, but unfortunately not. But then it's when they respond back, which, to be fair, they have every right to, because you want to know why am I not right for a job? Like, I'm taking the time to send my CV to you. Why am I not right? So I totally understand why feedback is absolutely critical, and I try and give it. But sometimes, on the other side of things, what happens is we engage with candidates and we can't get hold of them. So they say recruiters ghost us. We get ghosted too, by clients and also by candidates as well. So it's a real mix. But obviously that's not highlighted as much as candidates being ghosted by recruiters.
No, I think the recruitment bashing, when I see it, just, to be honest, it bores me because again, I use that word, it's a lazy headline. It's not true. I think in that example you've just described, if people are sending in speculative application CVs that aren't relevant, and like you say, if it's asking for ABC, they barely have C, but they send it in anyway. But then ask, you're not there to you're there to fill a role, right? And you're not necessarily there to coach people in how to do things, how to do applications better, or give that kind of feedback. So I think the onus is actually on the people looking for roles, like you say, to make it specific, to do some of the work. And in my experience, even if you're internally recruiting for positions, it's tough, and it's tough to be able to give specific feedback every time because you're conscientious and you want to help people that maybe haven't got the role. So I can imagine on scale across multiple roles, that's difficult to to manage. Yeah,
absolutely,
definitely.
it really is. But then I will say it's difficult to manage if you've got to give specific feedback, but to send a note just saying thank you, but unfortunately not. I don't that shouldn't have that should be a norm. It shouldn't be difficult to send that, because I do mine manually, but there are automated systems, to say thank you for applying for the role, but unfortunately not. So, when people say, well, I don't even get a response, whether that's internal or from a recruiter,
that's not good.
that's difficult. I find that difficult.
That's not good. I want to pivot now slightly to something that I know you're really interested in. You're going to start talking about publicly. It's definitely a topic that I'm interested in, and listeners of the podcast have always shown an interest in, and that's kind of diversity and inclusion. Is it a relatively new kind of diversion for you? What can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So it's new in terms of, I guess, me being public about it, but it hasn't been new because it's always been ingrained in my DNA effectively. So what I've found over the years is that there are organizations who want to hire people of color or women or whatever that specification is. And I find that I actually get called by recruiters, especially as I've been independent, saying, as an example, do you know any Black females who may be able to do X, Y, and Z? And of course I do, because I've got a huge network, and so I'll help them out in those ways. Then I've got a specific BAME recruiters who are connected to me as well, so they reach out to me for advice and things like that. So I've been doing it kind of off the cuff for a number of years, and I've always enjoyed doing it. And if I can help, that's kind of always been my way. If I can help, then I'll go out of my way to help. But then I was thinking, with when George Floyd kicked off, everything kind of just shifted. The whole world shifted around, okay, so let's have more presence of people of color on TV, as an example, or in the workplace, let's put together our diversity and inclusion strategies all of a sudden. So it's become like this big thing, but it was always there, but just may have not been implemented in the right way. So I've always been a real, I guess, wave the flag for people of color, and especially women, especially in business. And because this is my sector, in recruitment and contact center, so I wave the flag from that perspective. So I have kind of been looking into, how do I go about utilizing the skills, the experiences that I do in order to support organizations. So that's the route that I'm taking. I'm passionate about it because, someone said to me, well, who else better to raise the flag about a Black woman than a Black woman who knows what she's talking about? So that's partly why I decided to take that route. But also what that does is it allows me to still do what I love, which is recruitment, but also have a different string to my bow. So it could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'm doing recruitment, and then Thursday, Friday, it's diversity and inclusion. So I've always kind of given myself the bandwidth to do lots of things which kind of work and slot together quite nicely. But it just also gives me the opportunity to help other people as well. Because a client I've been speaking to recently, they're thinking about recruiting a number of, and I have to be color specific here, but Black people, because they just don't have enough Black people in their business. And one of the conversations I had was, well, it's interesting because, recruitment is what I do. I can go out and find you Black people, if their names are on, if their pictures are on LinkedIn, but there are other ways of going out and identifying those individuals. So I thought, what a brilliant challenge, what an amazing challenge. But it just also means that I've just have some credibility when I'm having conversations with those individuals about why the organization is doing this, the value that brings, but the benefit it is to them as well. So it's speaking from someone who's in the same situation as them than somebody who probably doesn't understand where they're coming from. But also what that means is I can actually shape things as well. So in terms of, if these individuals join an organization and they're not right, or they interview for an organization and they're not right, that they're part of a community that I can actually start building, but also they can be mentored. There's all sorts of things that can spring from that going forward as well. So I just want to do something that's really, really different, that can actually help, I suppose, escalate people who need to be supported to bring, because it is about numbers in some companies, but also some people are just really, really keen just to make sure that the talent they bring in is the right talent. So it may not necessarily be a woman, may not be a person who has a disability or a person of color. It's the right people, but I need to try and find those individuals, ideally, who kind of meet that brief as well.
Well, firstly, more power to you. I think it's great. It's great to hear that kind of flag waving, passionate person about wanting to elicit change. I would like to count myself in that, but I think what I love about what you've just said is I can see as being um, a leader within a company and also having this podcast, I would be drawn to you because I think you'd be able to help address something that maybe I'm being naive, but I think generally a majority want to see work and role models and people in senior roles that better reflect society. And that means women, people of color, disabilities, far more than people like me, right? Middle-aged white guys. But I don't know if they always know where to start. And I think sometimes they're nervous about offending people.
Absolutely.
And some of that is about language terms, some of it is about how to do it. And for someone like yourself, credible expert can help people achieve that, right? That in a very practical sense, which sometimes is the easiest thing for people to fall back on, which is I want things to be better. Tell me how.
Absolutely. Absolutely, I agree. And I want that, because the thing is we talk about diversity all the time, but then we go, oh my God, like, how do I address her? And that's what I don't like is, but you know, one of the things that happened to me when I was in a recruitment business years ago was people didn't, I'm quite a strong and very, I'll say what I feel effectively. People didn't say they didn't like me because I was strong or I was good at what I did or whatever it was, or I annoyed them. They didn't like me because I was Black. And the thing was like, well, how can you not like me because I'm Black? My skin color may be slightly different to yours, but I'm exactly the same. So the issue wasn't who I was, it was my skin color. And that used to just annoy me. The problem I also found is because, you know, you can kind of normally pick up as well if someone doesn't, there's something that's not sitting right with somebody in particular. You can see that. But because they don't outrightly call you a name or say something discriminatory, it's really interesting, but you know it. And that's really quite difficult to work with as well, because you know that behind closed doors, they're saying probably whatever they want to about you, and you can't address that in any way. And I found that difficult to work in an organization and know that that was going on and I couldn't address it. So I'd like to be, again, the person who is going to be an influencer in organizations, because it's not right, it's unfair. That's, you know, there's nothing else to say, but it's unfair. It's not for a person to grow. Then you need to have support around you and not feel that there's something holding you back. My color shouldn't hold me back. That's always been my view.
Completely agree. And I kind of went through this change after work. I worked in Istanbul for a couple of years, and I think labels and generalization, and I love the people who I worked with made me feel so welcome within a few days. I was very open-minded anyway, but within a few days, what I thought about the culture of Turkey and how people might work completely shattered, and I was learning about how they worked and seeing so much great things. And then I would come back to the UK and sit in meetings with very senior people who talked so poorly of my colleagues, that just without any knowledge, without ever having spent any time with them or ever having worked there. And I found it infuriating, and later on found my voice. And I think once that happened, even now, I think if you're prepared to call people out and have challenging, polite conversations where we all respect each other, but nonetheless have challenging conversations, because I think a lot of the time we're fighting against media, but quick thinking where you just generalize people based on certain characteristics, and there straight away is the danger, because it's, whether it's refugees and you've got politicians saying them or those people over there are the cause of our problems, and people buy into it, and then it starts seeping into our own society. I think that's where we have huge challenges. So people like you who are making a positive difference, that's what gives me hope that we are gonna get there, and we are a progressive society. doesn't always feel like it, but I really do. Maybe I'm, like I say, being naive or an optimist, but as long as we keep challenging, I think we will get there.
I agree. Totally agree.
Where would what would you recommend? This is a huge question, but where would you recommend people start if they just want to educate themselves as to, do they start with people's experiences who are not like them and say, what has your life been like?
So what do you mean, is it on an individual basis or a company basis?
Let's well, whichever's you prefer to answer first.
So interestingly, so going back to when George Floyd, the whole incident happened there was obviously a huge uproar everywhere. And I decided to share my story on Facebook. So my father was in the army. I won't go into lots of detail, but my father was in the army, traveled around a lot, but I grew up in Yorkshire, which was predominantly white. And I had like some absolutely amazing friends. Then I actually shared my story. And even though a lot of my friends have been my friends, close friends for years, they didn't even realize just the impact on the situation, the racism I faced growing up. They were just absolutely bemused, even though they were by my side, and they were absolutely bemused by it. And what I found was I was getting lots of questions, and even now, like I got a question from someone saying, well, how do I speak to my daughter? Because my daughter's mixed race about this. How do I speak to my daughter about a particular subject? So what for me, what happened was when I wrote about it, it just made other people aware of the situation, but they felt that they could actually approach me about it. And I don't know if it was a case of maybe we shouldn't say anything because I don't want to, upset her or ask it in this way. But now, like literally, there's always something coming through. How do I tackle this situation? Or B, when you did this or this happened, like what did you do to kind of tackle that? Or how are you, because my daughter needs to kind of grow up and understand, what I went through to be able to raise her son and things like that. So I'm always answering questions, because if we don't answer questions, people will never learn and people will never grow. So one of the things that used to really hurt me as a child was being called coloured, because I'm not the colour of a rainbow, I'm actually black. But then my grandson came home, interestingly, from nursery the other day, and he said, oh, the lady at nursery said, I'm not black. And then he started trying to like wipe his skin. And I'm like, oh my God, like, it was just, just things like that. So it's, I just think ask questions, because no one's ever afraid. If you feel nervous about asking a question, I would always say, write it down first, reread it to yourself, and then ask the question, because then you'll have confidence in it. And just say, look, if you feel, if I'm wording it incorrectly, please let me know how I need to address this, but can you help with this? I guarantee there's not one person who wouldn't want to help. I just think that because a lot of people think that, especially they say about me that I'm really hard and like I'm unapproachable, which is the absolute opposite of who I am. I'm probably, and my friends say all the time, I'm the person who cares the most about everyone else and less about myself. So it's crazy.
Again, it's that word about perception, isn't it? Someone said this football thing I organise on a Sunday, someone said, you're nothing like I expected when I saw you. I thought you were a thug because I've got no hair. I'm a skinhead. I've shaved my head. And he said, you're really, really nice. And it was like, aren't we funny as humans?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just he built this picture up as to how he thought I was going to talk, how I conducted myself, my behavior, everything, my education, just everything based on a glimpse of me, in shorts and a t-shirt playing football. So it is funny. How did your friends, though, in that situation, did they contact you and say they just weren't aware and they're sorry? How did they react?
Oh gosh, like I think I cried for days like after.
Really?
Because it was like literally they called me Bruce back then, because everyone called me Bruce Lee for some random reason, but they literally so as an example, there was an example where I'd literally go to school every day, and there'd be situations where I had to fight every day, unfortunately, because my mum brought me up as not a thug. My mum brought me up as, you need to protect yourself, you need to be strong and confident and let nobody walk all over you. So imagine being 12 or 13, and like every single day I'd go to school and people would call me all kinds of horrible things every single day. And my mom was like, well, there's no way on earth that you can just accept that. So as a younger child, I was actually fine. It was when I went into secondary school that it was actually really bad. And so I'd end up having fights every single day because there was always someone who thought they could call me something else and everyone would laugh at me. And it was awful. Like, it was actually awful. And so one of my friends used to say, yeah, because we used to call you Bruce because you were always fighting like Bruce Lee, because I like literally, so it stuck, and obviously Brucine being my name. So I used to fight all the time. So obviously there was a perception there that I was a bit of a rebel because I was always fighting. But then actually most people knew the only reason I used to fight was to defend my colour, and then defend my brother who was younger, and then our family friends who moved to the area. So I was kind of always fighting for us, always. And I remember a time I went home from school and mum said, how was it today? I said, oh, mum, I said, you're not going to believe this. She said, well, what happened? She said, I got called in front of the headmaster because, oh God, so we were, I hate this one. So we were actually in a geography class, which was my worst lesson. And I clearly didn't pass that at all. And back then we had TVs and they put a video on of something to do with Africa. And there was always something happening. Someone would always turn around and look at me. And then this particular instance, this guy turned around, looked at me because they showed a monkey on the TV. And I was just like, I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, we're in the middle of a class. And this time I was like, it's not acceptable. So we just end up having a huge like scuffle in the class. Then I went to the headmaster and stood out in front of the headmaster's office. And obviously he stood there as well. Now, I didn't get into trouble, but I should have, because actually I instigated the fight because of what he'd done. And obviously I explained to the teacher. And I went home and I was really, really upset. I told my mum the situation. She was just like, you did what was right. Like, don't ever think that you didn't. But obviously that's, again, was something that was like, everyone used to talk about it throughout the whole of my school life because it was something that was really significant. So all the other fights were not relevant. It was this one because it was in a classroom where this guy had seen a monkey on TV, looked at me, and it all kicked off from there. So there were some real challenges I had as a youngster, but I can't tell you, like, if I hadn't had those experiences, I would not be who I am today. So even though they were not great, I'm absolutely thankful for them because, you know what, at the time they were horrific, but that would never happen to my family or anyone that I know. And I'd, help them through it. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing. We have to be annoyed by stuff. It makes my blood boil, and I, as an empath, I think in my heart, just any child, person, adult, whatever, who has to deal with things like that has to be our goal as a society, that we are in a place where people just can conduct it, whether it's women going running or walking home from places at night without being harassed or attacked, or children suffering from being subjected to racist abuse in school. We have to be upset by this, and we have to do something about it. The goal has to be that we all get to enjoy our life as it is. Life's tough enough without this.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing, and thanks for actually being a fantastic role model and just trying to do something about it. I'd love to talk to you more about how I can help, how we can all do more, because I think that's the thing from George Floyd. When that happened, I actually was really pleased that every company I knew, every company was forced by the people that worked in the company by saying, you need to tell us what your view is as a company on this. We sent out an email and had discussion groups and things like that. But I love the fact that it was kind of, because I think previously it would have been, well, we're a company, this is a business, we don't need to reference something that's happening in society because we have a diversity and inclusion policy, we're doing all we can, blah, blah, blah. This was such a seminal moment that, specifically about the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd. What do you, as our company leaders, say about this?
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. I loved it, but it actually, I think, made us stronger as a company, and it galvanized people to say, yeah, we we need to up the pace.
Absolutely.
We need to get better and quicker and more aggressive in our response to these travesties that have gone on for so long. Do you think you'll find that you'll get so passionate about this that you'll end up doing no recruitment?
Probably. No, I always have to do a bit of recruitment because I've 25 years I've been a recruiter now, so I have to continue doing it. I think there'll always be something that I do, because even when I say I'm going to try and move away and do something different, it always creeps back in, always. And I think that's just part of my DNA now. And I'm proud to be a recruiter. I have to say it, because I've learned so much from our industry and the people within our industry. So I can't just walk away from that completely at all.
We're getting close to a challenge for time. I'd love to have you come back on and talk some more about this, if that's okay. But are you open for companies and individuals to contact you if they've listened to this podcast and want to talk to you more about it?
Absolutely. No ifs and buts. I love it. I love to talk about it. It's important that we talk about it, because it's the only way we get change.
I love that. Brucine Francis, thank you very much for coming on and sharing. And as I said, more power to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.